explanation about what the Python user group does for a few. I think there are like 2 or 3 new members, first timers here, right? You probably found us about via meetup.com or LinkedIn. We actually have a website. You could go to this website. Oh, this is PyCon. You could go to our website over here. And whenever we release new talks on YouTube, I will put a post on here so that you get notified that we did that. It's basically like a mailing list. You can subscribe here for $0, and then you subscribe to the mailing list. Or if you like what we are doing, you can donate a bunch of money to us, like $5 per month or something. Especially if you enjoy the pizza here, right? You might consider signing up as a member. And yeah, you should definitely just subscribe to meetup.com so that you get notified when I schedule a new meetup, okay? All right, so this is just a note to myself. I believe I've done this. Just uninstall everything again, yeah? So if you want to get rid of UV, you need to do these things here. So now I'm clean, okay? So UV is supposed to be a super awesome package manager, yeah? The one package manager to rule them all, basically, okay? So of course, you should definitely have a look at the documentation. It's very good documentation, very well described how to install it on Windows and on Mac and on Linux. So how do we install it? Via curl, as so often is the case nowadays. So let's do that. So, okay, it's installed. Sometimes when you do this the first time, it will also tell you that you should put this into your bash RC file, okay? So I've already done that. Let's have a look at my bash RC file, or actually in my case, ZSH RC. So you can see down here, I'm sourcing that cargo env thingy, okay? And I think that's because UV is written in Rust. I think we should probably rename ourselves to Rust user group. last month, LangDB is written in Rust. The month before, we had a talk about pandas, polars, which is written in Rust. And I think the month before, we also had something that was also written in Rust. So I have now installed UV, and probably the first thing you might want to do is update. I mean, it does install the latest version, obviously, so this is not going to do anything, but every month or so, you want to check if there's a new version, and you can simply do it this way, okay? UV self-update. It tells me that I'm already on the latest version. And in the documentation, they also tell you if you want to have Z shell auto-completion, you should put this stuff into your Z shell RC file. So you can see over here, I put that in there. Okay, so now if I do like UV tab, I'm getting all nice auto-completion. Yeah. Okay, so installation, super easy. Curl, that's it. Okay. So that works on any machine, right? If there's no Python, you can install UV this way. Okay. And then you can use UV to install Python. So if you just say UV Python install, it's going to install. Okay, I don't know why it decided to install 3.11. I would have expected that it should install the latest version. There might be some artifacts that from my previous installation where I might have pinned Python version 3.11. So I don't know. Yeah, so we can install a specific version by saying UV Python install and then the version that we want. Okay, it already found the one that it has just installed. So for demonstrations purposes, let's now also request 3.12. So now I have both, right? Then we can say UV Python pin. Let's say I want to work with 3.11 now. So now it's pinned. And then I can say, so in order to invoke the Python interpreter, we always say UV run. And then it kind of runs in its own shell where that whatever Python version it thinks should be the current one will be activated. And so then the Python command should be available to us, right? So if we do UV run Python, we see it's the 3.11, which is the one that I have pinned over here, right? So now let's instead pin 3.12 and do UV run Python. Now it's running 3.12, okay? So that's already pretty awesome, I think. If you want to know what versions you currently have, you do it this way, UV Python list. And it's interesting, it finds homebrew Python This one here is the one that UV has installed. This one is the one that came with my MacBook, right? So if UV finds that you already have a certain version, it's not going to reinstall it. It's just going to use that version that you already have, right? And if it can't find the version anywhere, then it's going to download and install it. Okay, let's pin back to version 12. Okay, yeah, we've already seen this. So UV also manages your virtual environments, so you don't have to worry about virtual env and virtual env wrapper and all these things anymore. So what I would now always do, I would go into my projects folder, and then I would do UV init, and then the name of my project, let's call this one UV demo, and then -- lib. So then I will go into that folder, and it created a README file, a PyProject TOML file, a source folder, the UV demo folder, and an init file with some boilerplate code inside. Okay, let's open this up in Cursor. So this -- lib over here. Oh, what did I do here? Why is there? Okay, this. If you leave out the -- lib, then there will be the README, the PyProject TOML file, and some main.py file. So just 3 files. If you say lib, it puts everything into the source folder so that you might publish this as a package and put it on PyPy, right? So I prefer to have this structure with no matter how small my projects are. I always do the lib thingy here, okay? Okay. This is Visual Studio Code. Right, next, moving on. So we are in that folder, we pinned Python 3.12. So by pinning a certain Python version, when you are in one of those folders that have a PyProject TOML file, it creates this .python version file here, okay? And so this is how it remembers that for this project, you want to use 3.12, yeah? And so you will have many different projects, and everywhere you pin different Python versions, and that they keep track of it by putting that file in there. I think, and I don't know why it doesn't do that automatically, if I would want to go back to 3.11, it changes in this file, but I found that it doesn't change here in the PyProject TOML file. I don't know if that's a bug. So then you would manually set this to the 3.11 as well, okay? Okay, so now we can use UV to add libraries. Yeah? So I could do something like UV add Flask. And it's now creating a virtual environment and installing Flask. And it's pretty fast. So now you can see there's a venv folder here, good old venv that we know from virtual env already. And in the PyProject TOML file, it has added Flask to the dependencies. Yeah? So no need for requirements text anymore. And it creates a log file. I guess that is the main selling point of this whole thing, right? Where Flask has a lot of sub-dependencies itself, right? And so let's actually have a look at those. So you can do UV pip list, and you get to see what is now in my virtual environment. I only installed Flask, but Flask depends on a few other things as well. So these things are now also installed, right? And I'm not sure if Flask is guilty of this, but let's assume the maintainers of Flask didn't pin all their sub-dependencies. Maybe they put blinker in there and didn't define any version number, right? So that means if I want to install this environment 1 year later, and I have pinned everything in my own PyProject TOML file, it could be that because of Flask, I'm getting a different blinker version than the one that I got today. In the future, there's a newer version, and then I will get that one. And this is exactly what happened to me today. I teach Python at the Civil Service College, and I use Docker. I was so sick that every time I teach the class on everybody's computer, things don't work because Python version mismatches and whatever, and package version mismatches, right? So I was like, okay, now I use Docker. But then I was too lazy to use virtual env inside Docker, right? And I was just using a requirements text file. So yesterday, in preparation for my class, I was booting up my Docker container from scratch, and it didn't work because some library had a sub-dependency that now had a newer version, and that version broke everything, right? So I think having these log files is absolutely crucial. So here it pins down all the versions for everything that has been installed. Yeah? And it actually pins that for every kind of operating system. Yeah? So even though I'm on Mac, it also pins down what would be the correct binary for this library for like different Linux versions and for Windows and so on. Okay, so that way, whoever, no matter what operating system they use, if they clone your repo and they type UV sync, they will get the right versions of everything and the correct binaries for their operating system. Okay, so here's another interesting thing that we probably all know from pip as well. We can install def dependencies. Yeah? Previously, I did uv add flask. If I do uv add --def black, for example, now it's going to install black. And you can see it shows up here as a def dependency. Yeah? And then there are commands like if you want to deploy this on your server, you probably don't want to install your def dependencies. Then there's like uv sync -- no def or something. I forgot what's the actual flag. You can just look that up in the README. Okay. So def dependencies. Here's another interesting one. uv tree. It's similar to the uv pip list, but this shows us I actually only installed Flask and Black, and the other things are there because of Flask and Black. Now you can see which subdependency came from which main dependency that I had defined. Yeah. So now let's kill the vn folder. Yeah, so it's gone. No more vn folder. Let's say I'm a new employee. I join the team, get a computer, git clone the repo. All I need to do is install uv and then uv sync. This would then install the right Python and download all the packages and install them. And you see, uv seems to have a pretty awesome cache, and this was amazingly fast right now. Yeah, so if you don't clean the cache and you use certain packages very often in many projects, it's not going to re-download everything all the time. It's somewhere on your computer in a cache, yeah, and it's super fast. Okay, so right, so then generally, yeah, we just do uv sync. Yeah? Now it's all in sync. And the moment you do uv sync, it creates the log file. And then every next uv sync will look into the log file and not into the PyProject.toml file anymore. Unless you change something in the PyProject.toml file, then it will update the log file, okay? So we can also use uv to install global commands that are not part of my virtual env. So for example, maybe I always want to use Ruff with every project that I do. So I might want to install that globally. I have done this before, and because of that, I believe the executable is lying around somewhere on my disk, and I didn't delete that earlier. So it's warning me here that the executable already exists, and if I really want to reinstall it correctly, I have to use force. Then it's going to overwrite wherever the Ruff executable has been deployed earlier. Yeah? So now I have the Ruff command available, and it's not happening anymore. When I did this the very first time, there was a message here that I should consider adding running uv tool update shell. Yeah. And basically, it just makes sure that user local bin is in my path. So I guess it updates my Z shell RC file, right? Okay. So now that I have installed Ruff globally, I can use uv run Ruff. And if you use the Ruff binary, you say Ruff check this folder, and then it's going to look at all Python files in this folder and in all subfolders, and look for linting errors and formatting errors and things like that, right? I had also installed Black in my venv, so I can also run Black by saying uv run Black. Yeah, so here's it executed Black. It's also Black is it's a code formatter as well, right? So essentially, when you say uv run and you ask to execute some kind of binary, uv will figure out where can I find this binary somewhere, right? It knows where it usually installs its own binary, so it will first look into your virtual environment, and then it will look into the global, into your local bin folder and see if Ruff can be found there, and it's going to use that one, okay? So that's how we can execute stuff. Another thing that I found interesting is this. In our PyProject.toml file, we can add project.scripts. And then we can name that script, anything we want, hello. And then we can say, in our UV demo package, we promise that there is a function called hello, and there is indeed a function called hello. This is when I did UV init, it created this file already, okay? So now this will be available as a script, so I can now do UV run hello. Yeah, so if you're building a library and you constantly want to test your library in your terminal, you just give it a name, you point it to the correct function, to the entry point of your script, and now you can always UV run hello, and then it's going to run that code, okay? So is this the one package manager to rule them all? Is Python packaging finally not painful anymore? Let's try to install uWhiskey. No. It does not work, okay? So there are still some glitches here and there. I'm actually quite happy that I stumbled upon this. I was testing this against my my former workplace requirements text file, which has like 100 libraries, and I just wanted to see if UV manages to install everything. And uWhiskey is one of those libraries, and it crashed. Yeah, but I think this is not really the fault of UV. This is more the fault of the uWhiskey people hard coding the location of certain libraries in their binaries somehow, right? And so to fix this, there's a tool called sysconfig patcher. Yeah, so I'm using now, it's a Python tool. I'm using UV to install sysconfig patcher globally using the UV tool install command. Yeah. Then if you want to find out, by the way, where does UV put the Python versions that it has installed, you can run UV Python dir, and then you know the directory where all the Python binaries are. And so now I can use sysconfig patcher to patch the Python version that needs patching. So in my case, we have installed 3.11 and 3.12. I might probably just want to patch both, right? So let's patch this one, and then patch the other one. And then let's do UV add uWhiskey again. And it works, right? Okay. So that's the part about UV, okay? Hopefully I could convince you that this is pretty awesome. It's because of the log file, my hope is if I would run this VN a year from now, UV sync, it should just work, hopefully, right? Which remains to be proven. But it's really damn fast. If you have a long list of dependencies, it downloads them in parallel. So you get a really nice output where all the dependencies show up, and then they all have their own loading bar in your terminal, and they all get downloaded in parallel. And so that already speeds things up quite a lot, right? Unlike pip, where one comes in after the other, right? Okay, let's also talk about Ruff, since UV and Ruff are both under the umbrella called Astral. So these guys are making super awesome, super fast Python tools written in Rust. Yeah. So, and Ruff is a linter and formatter. You probably all know Black, or you know pylint, or Flake 8. These tools, you don't need them anymore. You can just use Ruff. Okay. So where are my slides? How do we install Ruff? Well, I've shown it earlier. We could globally install it using UV. So now I have the Ruff executable on my machine, right? Then if you want to use Ruff in your project, you might want to update your PyProject TOML file. And here you can set all kinds of settings. Yeah, there's a lot that you can configure with Ruff. Yeah. You can configure what kind of errors it should be linting. Maybe there's some errors that in your project, you just can't fix them. Then you will exclude those errors from the linting. You can exclude files and folders here, all kinds of things. You need to read the Ruff documentation for all the possible settings that are available here, right? But I like to tell it that it should use line lengths of 80 characters. We will see in a second what that does, right? And then in VS Code, you would do this. You would open your workspace settings, and you would put in at least this, okay? So I always like to set my rulers to 80 so that I see this line over here, right? And then we have to tell Visual Studio that it should format on save. So when I press save, everything should already format itself nicely. And here we are telling it that the formatter that we are using is not black or whatever other formatter, but Ruff, okay? And so Ruff can also sort your imports. There is a Visual Studio plugin called iSort that some of you might be using, and Ruff has the same functionality as iSort. I couldn't figure out how to make it sort the imports when I press save. That somehow doesn't work. But I'm showing you this workaround here. By setting this I setting here, we are kind of enabling the iSort capabilities, and now I will show you how that looks like. Okay, so let's see. We have the Ruff linter now, right? Let's put some very long code over here. So this is more than 80 characters. If I press save, it makes it so that it's less than 80 characters, right? So that we all know this from Black and so on. Let's make something that creates a warning. Let's import maybe Ray, and then down here we can see the warnings. And you see, this is coming from Ruff, this warning. Normally this comes from pylint, I guess, right? And you know, when you start Visual Studio the first time and you click at a Python file, it recommends to install the Python plugin, and that will install pylint and so on as well. Actually, don't need that anymore. You can just install the Ruff plugin instead. So here, yeah, over here, you would install the Ruff plugin, and you don't even need to install Ruff using UV. If you install the Ruff plugin in VS Code, it already comes with Ruff prepackaged as well. So really, the first thing that, you know, when you start a new job somewhere and they give you VS Code, you just go to the marketplace, you install Ruff, and then you have Ruff available in that VS Code instance. Okay, no need to install the library otherwise. So let's also import sys, and maybe let's also import Flask. Okay, so and see, now Ruff is warning me that the imports are not sorted, and I can click here and say organize imports, and now they are sorted. Yeah. I would love this to be just when I press save, and it should just happen automatically. But this is still good enough for me. I will never commit code where I'm seeing warnings down here. So it's part of my process to, before I commit my code, make sure that all the warnings are gone, and this one click is okay, right? Cool. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, that's pretty much it for my talk. So yeah, thank you for listening.